What if I told you that the world of flying cars is closer than you think? And that world is made possible thanks in large part to AI. And this can save lives and reduce carbon emissions. We'll be exploring this and more with two leading experts on today's episode of AI Curious. My name is Jeff Wilser. I'm a journalist, I'm a human, and I am curious about AI. And one thing I love about AI is that it opens up possibilities to things that used to sound super out there and sci-fi. Things like flying cars. And okay, maybe it still does sound sci-fi, but hear me out. Now, the technical term for these vehicles is evTOL, a terrible acronym that stands for Electric Vertical Takeoff and Landing. The idea is that it takes off like a helicopter, basically, so it doesn't need a runway. They typically have just a few passengers, much like a car, and they fly. So for the purposes of this podcast, we're going to call them flying cars. I was sort of stunned to read a piece of news recently that starting in 2025, a company called Joby will launch an air taxi in New York and ferry people from Manhattan to JFK Airport in 7 minutes. Like, that's actually happening. That's not 10 years away. That is imminent. So if that's the case, what else is on the horizon? How soon are we from this becoming mainstream? After all, it seemed like self-driving cars were nowhere near us, and then suddenly Waymo is now a real thing. Could flying cars be next? I wanted to dig in. And I also wanted to get a couple of different perspectives for this conversation. Someone who can give a really good macro look at the wider landscape of the flying car industry, the evTOL industry. And that brings us to Angelo Collins, the executive director of the Vertical Flight Society. I also wanted the point of view of an entrepreneur who's building one of these flying cars. So I'm thrilled to also speak with Leo Kayali, CEO of a startup called Invo Station. Now, I actually had met Leo in real life at the recent TechCrunch Disrupt conference, and he was part of what sparked the idea of his episode. Leo had a sign in the conference center for his flagship vehicle, or at least the initial images of it, and it looks something out of the future. It really does. He calls it a personal flying vehicle. It fits 3 passengers. It's fully electric and battery powered, and it flies itself. You do not have to use a steering wheel. Obviously, that uses AI. The design almost looks like a flying saucer. It's insanely cool. So how far are we away from that vehicle and others like it becoming a reality? We get into the timeline, the current landscape of the industry, the key tech that's powering in new innovations, and of course, the challenges that will have to be overcome for the truly go mainstream. Here's a bonus one that we did not cover in our conversation. No one asked for my opinion, but guys, we've got to rebrand the acronym evTOL. That is not doing anyone any favors. I can't see it sticking. But then again, what do I know? I thought the acronym ChatGPT was ridiculous, and here we are. Anyways, now all of this sounds incredibly pie in the sky, literally in the sky. But in the back half of our conversation, we do get into the nuts and bolts of what actually needs to happen to bring the cost of these down. How can this work economically? And obviously, an industry will not be born, will not flourish if this is not cost effective. Spoiler alert though, you'll hear from Leo that eventually his goal for these entry-level flying vehicle is $60,000. And finally, we cover the sneaky benefits to society of flying personal vehicles. Why are we doing this in the first place? Yes, it is cool. Yes, it scratches that 12-year-old sense of wonder itch. And that does matter, at least for me it does. But in the end, why do it? For both Leo and Angelo, it actually comes down to saving lives and cutting carbon emissions. So with that, please enjoy my conversation with Angelo Collins, Executive Director of the Vertical Flight Society, and Leo Kayali, CEO of Invo Station. Angelo, Leo, welcome to AI Curious.
Thanks for having us.
How you doing?
So I'm so fascinated to talk to you guys about the world of flying car, the world of AI. Sometimes we go, discuss AI ethics, sometimes AI problems, and those are all fair game, important topics to consider. But the little 10-year-old child in me loves covering topics like flying cars. So I'm so excited to talk to you guys about this. I want to hear from each of you kind of to give listeners a sense of where you're coming from, kind of talk about where you are in this field. Leo, you go first. What's your role in the world of flying cars? And Angelo, I want to hear where you fit in.
Sure. So I'm a CEO and founder of Invo Station, which is basically an evTOL company or a flying car company. I like to refer to it as a flying vehicle. But basically, we started in 2021 and we created this company that we're basically trying to make basically very cheap flying vehicles for people to use. So rather than becoming a luxury vehicle, we wanted to build something that's accessible for everyone. And AI is actually a big part of what we're doing, especially we're focused on autonomous flying vehicles. So pretty much from like business perspective, 60% of our business is AI independent. So, you're still in the same field.
No, and Leo, you snuck in an acronym there, evTOL. Can you please explain what that is, and what that means?
It's an electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicle. It just means that it can take off vertically and land vertically without a runway. Basically, that's kind of a simplified way. And then the E is electrical.
Okay, so kind of like a futuristic helicopter, more or less.
Yeah. So like a flying EV, futuristic helicopter that's powered by a battery.
Thank you, Angelo. How are you working? What is kind of your mission in advancing the cause of flying vehicles?
Yeah, and again, thanks for having me. Angelo Collins. So I'm the executive director of a nonprofit called the Vertical Flight Society. So we were founded back in 1943 in Stratford, Connecticut, effectively when Igor Sikorsky invented the helicopter. And so we are the thought leaders and the engineers and the researchers behind just vertical takeoff and landing, VTOL in general. And that goes beyond helicopters, of course, and especially when you're talking about eVTOL and flying cars and AAM. And so we represent the technical community, and we're a venue to publish, but also just talk and network with this community. And being in that role as kind of an early adopter research side of things, we had been engaging a lot of these companies 10 plus years ago. We hosted an event back in 2014 with Joe Ben from Joby. I was the administrative chair. He was helping run the calls to set this meeting up. Back then, we called it distributed electric propulsion. And I'm an aerospace engineer by trade. I can go on. We'll have the opportunity to talk to it. But there's a lot to unpackage. And depending on how you want to draw the boundary around what we're talking about, there's different terminology we can use. But again, glad to be here.
One reason why I wanted to have this conversation is I think there might be a disconnect between what the public is thinking as far as where we are with electric flying vehicles, autonomous flying vehicles, flying cars, if you want to call it that. I think most of us are imagining it being sci-fi land, still decades and decades away. And then, Leo, here we are. When I met you in person in San Francisco recently, you have a booth saying, "Hey, this is coming soon." And I'd like in this conversation to help us kind of connect the dots and bridge from how is it that in one sense it's coming soon, and in another sense it feels decades and decades away, and frankly always has. I mean, since I was a little kid, with obviously the Jetsons, the flying cars has in many ways symbolized this kind of mythical future of progress. And it has seemed like something that's always far away. But Angelo, as you point out, it started as 1940s, your organization, right? So there's been kind of work on this for 80 plus years. So Angelo, let's start with you. I'd love to get a baseline of how would you describe the current state of play or current landscape of self-flying vehicles, or let's call it loosely flying cars, in the sense of, and
Oh,
I know that we can
yeah.
I know there's a lot of variation there, but I guess the scope of this is you get someone like myself or my neighbor or you guys could have some vehicle that we own and get into it and go from somewhere near us to a different town in our vehicle.
Yeah. So we are the keepers of history as well, I should say, at the society. And you can go back, and for the viewers, you can Google the Piasecki flying platform or the air jeep, and you'll see back in the 1940s or 50s more so, we had flying cars and flying vehicles. An individual flying on a platform at whatever, hundreds of feet. And so this technology has existed. It's just really a question of how we packaged it, how easy it was to control, and where we are today. And part of this next renaissance, I suppose, is enabled by improvements in technology, especially lithium-ion battery, energy density, and distributing propulsion, more efficient, smaller, lighter weight motors. Because what we're really speaking to here, and I don't know if we've done a great job in the community, I will admit, it's just in some respects slightly different propulsion system, where we're using primarily in this conversation electric batteries and motors. There's also talk of hydrogen, and there's even turbo generators where you're basically still burning fossil fuels but generating electricity instead to power the motors. And so we've made advances in lightweight composites, lighter motors, as I said. And so, roughly 10 to 12 years ago, some of these guys, these smart people, like, actually, this could work. We could distribute propulsion to various motors to spin up propellers or rotors. And we could use these types of composites, and we can use an electric battery. We can use a lithium-ion battery to fly an aircraft. This is absurd. Let's start working on this. And so that was kind of the early days to where we are now, where we're able to have a 5 or 6 passenger aircraft with a lithium-ion battery in it, flying people. And the industry is trying to keep, or not industry, but the FAA and others are trying to keep up with how we certify and approve this, and what the airspace looks like. It's so that's still a conversation, but we're making progress there as well. And there are non-technical things holding us back in certain respects.
Yeah, I definitely want to get in a bit into kind of what are the main barriers for this truly scaling, and how much of it is technical, how much regulatory, how much a cultural communication issue, education issue. Leo, how about you? How would you characterize the current environment of flying cars? And what was, as an entrepreneur, I'm curious from your perspective, was there any inflection point, any technological change or advancement that gave you a light bulb saying, aha, 5 years ago, I never would have dared or dreamed to jump into this, but thanks to a change in X, this is viable, this can and will be profitable?
Yeah. So I think Angelo did a very good job, covering all the historical part of this. So pretty much every single person I talk to in San Francisco, San Francisco is very active startup society, I would say. There's a lot going on all the time, and every time I talk, it's like the people mind just blow. Like, really, this is happening? And I show them like, hey, there's a few companies been flying for over 5-10 years now, and they've been testing different type of motors, and there's different thing that's already happening. Like today, I go to our SoCal facility very often, and my family is in Santa Monica, and one company is usually just they're doing test flights, so they're going in loops over and over just over our house. And this is happening today. It's not something in like the next 10 years or a futuristic technology. This is actually, the technology is here and it works. It's happening today. And like Angelo said, we're working, companies are working hand to hand with regulators, and then we're working with cities. Like the best example I would say, I think it is Joby that's going to fly in 2025 in downtown San Francisco.
I believe New York also, right? I think they're working on a
Yeah,
an air taxi that goes from Lower
yeah,
Manhattan to JFK Airport in like
yeah, exactly.
7 minutes, as I
Yeah,
understand. Yeah.
yeah. And there's another company that I saw they're doing like today. They're doing flights between 3 different cities to a specific airports, and yeah. So this is the technologies here. It's happening today. It's gonna scale up, rapidly in the next few years. So, to give you a timeline, we envision, like, for example, Invo Station in 2027 start doing test flights. So 2025, we're releasing our first vehicle. So in January, at CES, we'll be revealing our first vehicle. And then 2 years after that, we'll be doing the certification for that vehicle. And then I think 2027 will be the first flights that the vehicle will be available to be used and flying around. And we think San Francisco is the best place to start, but we're also having open conversation with different places. So that's like from our perspective.
If you need test pilots in Denver, you're welcome to come. I have a roof here. You can launch from
Yeah.
there. Angelo, I'd love to before we get into kind of the future stuff and both the potential and challenges. I'd love to get a little more grounding still on kind of the current industry landscape. How many? What I'm getting from you so far is that, and let me know if I'm off here, is that in the last 10 years, there have been a few pretty big advancements, especially in electric lithium batteries, realizing, okay, we can use electricity to power these things, improvements in propellers, electric power, and other tech has really accelerated innovation in the past 5-10 years. And there are companies, obviously including yours, Leo, that are working on this, including Joby, that is soon hoping to launch test flights. Angelo, can you give us a little more just meat and potato basics of how big this industry is? How many, like, who are the kind of main, you don't have to name all the names, but are there like half a dozen key flying car companies that are all working and racing to do this? Is it 50 companies? Is it 100? Is it 1,000? Is it one or two? Kind of, and what are you seeing from an industry perspective?
Yeah, and I'm not sure if you're setting me up because I have the answer, but we have a website called evTOL.news. We're also vtol.org, but we have a website evtol.news, and there's an aircraft directory there of evTOL, and we have over 1,000 concepts going
Wow.
back that 12 years, and these are in different phases.
Concepts meaning like any one type of vehicle would be a concept, or what does concept mean in a context?
So I don't want to deputize everyone in all of our audiences to be aerospace engineers, but you have the process of how you would develop an aircraft. You start with a paper study or just a back of the napkin drawing of what an aircraft could look like, and then you go through the process of getting to the point where you're doing flight testing and you have a prototype, and then you have a production variant concept. But these range anywhere from a nice CAD drawing, a three-dimensional CAD drawing, to an aircraft in flight test, a prototype. And so I'd say at the later stages, and I would say Joby has probably the most flight hours. Archer is catching up, but there's probably a couple dozen almost full-scale prototypes that are in flight test right now. And there are other concepts that are close to that. Maybe they were scaled. That's one of the steps you would do in burning down your risk when you're developing a concept, is you would have a smaller scaled prototype that you would do flight testing with. And then there's, as I said, maybe a couple dozen full scale prototypes that are in flight testing right now. And so they're making progress, and they got to collect flight data. And it's still very manual. You can do a lot of simulations, but you're flying. And that's something that the FAA also requires. But yeah, they're making a lot of great progress. And as far as companies, I don't want to miss anyone, but Beta in Burlington, Joby, Archer, Lilium in Europe. There's Ascendance Air in France. There are a lot of international companies. There's who else did I miss? I said Beta in Burlington, Archer,
Airbus,
Wisk,
eHank,
and a lot of the car companies too do have some, like Supernal, Hyundai, I think.
I was going to go there later, but I am just, if we can quickly hit this now, why, if I was a CEO of a major car company, why wouldn't, I guess the answer is obvious in a sense of, well, you have bigger fish to fry and this is so speculative, but why wouldn't you have some small percentage of your revenue and profits be allocated to R&D for flying cars, because you have that brand factor. You have, if I'm
Yeah.
Honda, if I'm whoever, like that might be more trusted by a consumer than some rando startup you never heard of, right? So are we seeing car companies thinking about investing in this as a,
Yeah.
or are we not? And if not, why are we not? What's your thought on that?
I can start that if you don't mind. I've
Leo,
had
yeah, yeah,
recent
yeah, yeah.
conversations with few car manufacturers. I met with the VP of innovation of Honda. So basically, I met him in Toronto, Canada, and he mentioned that their entire department funding back then was about $20 million. So they did not want to commit funding to that technology because, way back in time, they tested a few designs and technology back then wasn't that great. So they decided not to pursue. Today is changing slightly. And that meeting that I mentioned is about just 1 year old. But today, Toyota is doing investment right now in evTOL. I recently met with a few VPs of Toyota. They're very interested and they're actively investing in multiple evTOL technologies. And I've heard that Honda is trying to pivot right now. When I first started the company, I met with the CEO of Nissan. We'd had a conversation. Back then, we just had a concept. Like, Angelo said, we did not even have a vehicle back then. And we're just trying to see, okay, can this idea catch any interest? And so in my opinion, there's a lot more interest today than in the past. I come from a background with Tesla. I built their production line for their Cybertruck batteries, and worked on various production lines for Tesla and battery technology. I patented some of their battery technology. And Tesla, they're not currently building any eVTOL as far as I know, but they had a hyper supersonic project that's kind of totally different, and it's more of I would say maybe a military application, and they're spread across a lot of different products right now. But I think eventually they will catch up.
This seems so up Elon's alley. It is shocking to
Exactly.
me. Elon has not announced plans
Not
for
yet. Just say
not
not
yet,
yet.
not
Not yet.
yet.
I'll
And
say,
Angela,
And
Angela, how about
yeah.
you? What are you seeing from kind of the kind of current car industry's perspective, as far as to what extent have they been flying car curious?
Well, I'll say this. I think there's the scene in Armageddon where they're discussing, like, all right, do we want to train astronauts to be able to drill, the deep sea drilling guys, or do you want the deep sea drilling guys to be trained to be astronauts? What's easier here? And there's some parallels. It's like, all right, do we want the car companies building VTOL platforms, or do we want the traditional aerospace companies building flying cars? What is the avenue of diminish or of less strain here? And it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, because there's a lot of complications. And understanding, yeah, we've built electric cars, and there's an electric drivetrain system. How does that tie into a VTOL platform? What are the similarities, but also differences? There's a substantially high discharge rate when you're flying a VTOL platform. You need to use a lot of energy in a small period of time. Whereas with the cars, you want it to be the opposite. You want to discharge more slowly, and you want to be able to extend the life of the battery in a Tesla. And so there's those types of interesting problems. But at the same time, it's funny for us because there aren't very many engineers that are classically trained in VTOL, rotary wing flight, edgewise flight, and they're a dime a dozen. And so if you're a car company that wants to start a spin-off air taxi company, who are you going to hire?
Right, right, got it.
Where are all these helicopter engineers when you need them? They're probably still at Sikorsky or Bell, and there has been. It's been over the last decade or so, them slowly poaching some of these subject matter experts. Because it's funny, in the early days, these guys would be spinning up rotors. Like, all right, great, it's hovering, and like, all right, we want to fly forward now. Like, oh, what's going on with the rotor? It's doing these weird things, and there's these vibrations. Like, oh, let me explain edgewise flight to you, because a rotor isn't meant to slowly hover. You're also going to fly forward.
Mm,
And you're going to have air hitting your rotor this
mm.
way, and that's going to cause some interesting physics problems. And you need a rotary wing engineer on your team.
I love that, and let's let that's a good segue to pivot into kind of what will it take to get this to go mainstream? What will it take before we live in a world where the sky is filled with these kind of vehicles? And one thing that really kind of arrested me, that really struck me when Leo and I first met in person, was, Leo, you mentioned that there are currently smart people at work designing basically highways in the sky. And that kind of blew my mind that was actually happening now. So maybe, Angelo, I think this is the purview of the VFS, I'm guessing. Can you talk a bit about what you guys are working on, or what is being done? Or if it's not you guys, who it is that's starting to think about, like, in the future, you can't just have this like complete Wild West of these flying vehicles going in willy-nilly. You need some kind of order for who has the right of way, almost like shipping lanes in the ocean and stuff. Like, so what's talk about this kind of like this aerial highway map being built, and then let's get into kind of what will it take to make this future a reality, and what are the key constraints and barriers and roadblocks. Angelo, go ahead.
Leo may be able to speak to the highway in the sky more so, but it's a challenging problem, and I think there's still questions that have to be answered. Does every aircraft need to have a pilot? And if not, then how do they talk to each other? What's the redundancy? Where is that central ground control station or something in the sky? Satellites that are keeping track of all these aircraft that are flying. And how do you have this multimodal problem where, all right, well, air traffic control, as we conventionally know it for airlines, we have these people visually tracking aircraft. And depending on how many of these small aircraft we're going to have in the general airspace, are people going to even be able to track all these aircraft? Or are we going to have use AI or other means to keep track of, all right, you're here, I'm there, and it kind of just does itself, it kind of manages itself. And it's going to be an interesting problem. And there are people on different ends. Like, no, we want pilots. We want people in that cockpit. We want them to be flying. It's a question of visual flight rule or beyond line of sight comms, or no, we want these to be automated. And there's some redundancy, but we want them to be talking to each other through a central AI engine that kind of keeps track of all the air traffic. So it's an interesting problem.
So that's when I'm so glad you kind of fleshed it out with some details there, because that does strike me as a pretty significant problem of not only the tech challenges to make that system work, but even kind of who will own that. There's no government agency that's working on this right now, is my guess. I mean, maybe there's some, or is there someone at some
the
smart
FAA has got
FAA?
next gen. They have a next gen concept. I forget what they're calling it. They're trying to stay on top of it.
Okay.
The FAA and the government agencies and the bodies, EASA, they're not built for innovation, and so they're trying to keep up with innovation. I mean, they're there for safety. Right. Just understanding, like, all right, you're going to certify your aircraft. We just really are going to confirm and due diligence.
Safety first, second, third, fourth, fifth, seventh.
Yes. 20th.
Innovation 115th, right?
Because innovation is, there's risk there.
It requires high risk.
Yeah.
That's like over my skis here, but if the FAA had its current rules in place when the Wright brothers were making their experiments, we would have no flying planes today, right? There had to be risk taken before we get into
a pilot's license back then. You don't need anything.
Yeah. And I would say you need like the data, and you need to prove that something works. Bring all the data, bring all the test results, and show the FAA, say we have this concept that works this way. And then, that's how it's been, happening in the past few years. Why do some evTOL companies get certified? Because they follow the certification process. They proved that this can work, this can fly. They proved several thousands or, certain number of hours of flights. They've proved it in simulation. And that's the role, in my opinion, that's a role, our role, like as companies, to prove that this technology work, bring that knowledge to the table and share it with the FAA. The FAA, just going back to the highways, they actually created something they call the FAA blueprint for evTOL. And you can go on their website. There's a link also attached to our website. And we took that and we basically merged it into our AI autonomy system. So this is where it comes the highways in the sky. So we literally took that wording, it's a text basically, and that's how airlines fly right now, pretty much in a similar concept, but it's more manually directed. And what we did is we automated that. We made it a software, and then so now we have vertical lanes. Each lane has different speed, and then we have horizontal highways. And then when you automate it, you basically program it where it doesn't allow two vehicles on the same highway to change the distance between the lanes horizontally or vertically. And then we created a way also based on the FAA text says how can you do the passing, how can a vehicle pass another vehicle. So if you're on a low speed lane, you have to switch to the higher speed lane, go faster and then pass the next vehicle. So there are these kind of rules. We created safe distance that you can't break, in the software. It's impossible to break between two vehicles. So we can guarantee that it's impossible to have an incident where vehicles are crashing into each other. And then, all the logistics with having a control center, we're basically automating that as well. So anytime you go inside your vehicle, you go on the screen, say, I want to go to this address on your GPS. It will do, a few things. It will calculate the best place to take off where there's nothing above of you, so you don't hit, power distribution line or something. So we'll go basically in area where it allows you to take off. It'll calculate the best route, and then calculate the best place to land. And then all that will be sent to a control center. That become basically digital information will be sent to that control center. That control center, in this case, is not a person, but can be monitored by a person. And they'll see, okay, I see this one flying this way. And then it automatically see all the basically flights that flying in certain direction. And then we'll decide if it's possible to be on this route. Should it be on this lane? Should it be on the next lane? Based on the technology, based on the speed, what type of aircraft. And, bottom line, it's a lot of data. And then to actually make it.
You guys have done it. It sounds like I was wondering how's it happen. You're like, oh, no big deal, but we actually solved that problem. It's on our website.
So we have the solution. It's only done when we have 100,000 vehicles flying in the sky with no incidents. That's when it's actually done. And the reality, it's going to be scaling up gradually, and so is our autonomy system. We will be training our data gradually. The more aircrafts are in the air, in the sky flying, and we can only achieve a complete autonomy if everyone else is autonomous.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So that's kind of
same issue with on cars and
exactly.
Right?
That's why we still have
self-driving cars. Yes.
Yeah. And in San Francisco, I don't know if you have Waymo where you're at, but in San Francisco and LA, I think they're deployed in Houston now. So, Waymo has been doing a very good job. They drive a lot better than anyone in San Francisco. And then they just got deployed to the highways. So this is a working technology. We're using, same computers Waymo using. We're using autonomy. That's a combination of 16 cameras, LiDARs, proximity sensors, and vehicle-to-vehicle sensor. So all of that basically creates a spherical view of your surrounding. So you can see everything around you. What's different when you fly is you're vertically taking off. So you need to see what's above of you and what's below. While in cars, you don't have that. So we have a lot more cameras. We have a lot more data to deal with. So our autonomy is a lot more advanced, require a lot more computing. And that, requires a lot of data. It's a lot more complex to manage and make it actually, happen.
I can only imagine. That's fascinating. Just briefly here, how would you, and I'm sure this alone could be a 5-hour conversation, but what would you say are the main tech barriers that have to be overcome to make this? So putting aside regulation, putting aside politics, overall cultural norms, and so on, but just tech itself, what barriers need to be overcome? And I think part and parcel to this is cost, right? I imagine if these things cost $1 million, there's no chance in hell it'll be mainstream. If it costs $200K, I'm guessing it won't be really mainstream. And the cost has to come down to a reasonable level for it to be
like a regular car cost.
Like a regular car, exactly. So what are the kind of tech barriers that need to be broken or overcome to get it so where the cost is in that ballpark so it can truly catch on?
Yeah, this is how we've kind of created our company. We want to build cheap cars for everybody to use. And the way we were able to achieve that, we pretty much designed every component in the vehicle from day one to be designed for mass production. So we got rid of all the processes that require several hundred hours of preparation, requires a lot of manual labor. Every component in our vehicle is produced by automated production line. And this is something, I've done when I used to work for Tesla. We automated pretty much all of our production lines to work that way. We can, like, pretty much our vehicle body all can be produced within 2 minutes. The whole vehicle will be manufactured in 2 minutes, just the body, not the whole vehicle. But this is a major improvement. We're using aluminum in our body. Unlike most of flying vehicles, they use carbon fiber. And one main reason we got rid of carbon fiber is, it's toxic. It takes a lot of hours to prepare. Each part and piece will have to be prepared separately. It's very complex process, and it's more expensive. And if you really want to sell it to everybody, you have to basically make things cheap enough and still be reliable. So we found that balance between the number of motors, the amount of force you need to take off, and then the weight of the body, where we can still have good structural support. We redesigned the vehicle like we design a car, and we design it in a way that can be cheap to manufacture. And then, in my opinion, that's like the way to go to that $60,000 evTOL vehicle. And our goal, we have three designs. We have luxury vehicle, family vehicle, and compact vehicle. The goal is to sell the compact vehicle for $60,000. Our luxury vehicle is right now will be sold for $350,000, which is still very competitive in the market. And Angelo knows, most of evTOL companies are sold for like $1.7 million at start point, and then it goes to tens of millions of dollars. And that's kind of like a key, how we're approaching this. And if we really want to compete with some of manufacturers that are in other countries like China, they can make things very cheap, very competitive. We have to start from day one designing things for mass production. Otherwise, we'll start something and then China will make it for $10,000, and then we're out of the market.
Right. Angelo, I'd love to hear from you. What are the non-tech problems that need to be solved for this to truly go mainstream?
So for non-tech, I would say, like we were speaking to, the business model needs to close. Like we do want to be profitable at some point, right? And so what is my cost per flight hour? That's one term we use in the aviation industry. And for helicopters, if you want to fly vertically, it's high. I mean, the cheapest VTOL platform is probably the R22, the Robinson R22. And so we're talking about at minimum $200 a flight hour. So if you ever take a flight in a helicopter, maybe it's a Bell 505 or a 407, you're talking about thousands of dollars a flight hour. And so are you trying to replace an existing VTOL platform with your eVTOL or your flying car? Are you creating this new opportunity, this new market that a current platform doesn't already fill? Because if you're trying to do cargo delivery with your flying car and you're trying to beat the price point of a Cessna Caravan, I mean, the Cessna Caravan is a very cheap way to fly air, mail. FedEx uses it. It's an older concept. That fixed wing is cheaper than VTOL. And, talking about maybe a few hundreds of dollars a flight hour. Is that your business model? You're trying to close that. Those are things these companies need to decide. And then also being able to potentially, hopefully, mass produce, as Leo said, your aircraft. Do you have enough customers? Because if you can't mass produce, there's efficiencies in scale and volume. So if you can build thousands of aircraft in a shorter period of time, you'll save money as a production company. But if you're only building one-offs, you're not going to realize those gains in your profit. So those are things that you have to think about as well.
So let's go some predictions. I'd love to hear from you guys on two different time frames. One, when do you think this will be something that we'll see early, beyond like a one-off prototype, beyond like making the news? Oh, so-and-so company flew from here to there, but more like maybe let's say where Waymo is now, right? You have kind of early adopters that are able to like use these things, and It's not yet ubiquitous, but it's not totally a one-off, right? So what year is that going to be in, you think? And then secondly, what year, if ever, do you think this will be truly mainstream in a sense of, like, from a sci-fi movie, you look up and there's a lot of things in the sky, and you can, like, it is not weird for you, your neighbor, to own one of these, and instead of spending 45 minutes fighting through traffic in your car, you pop in your evTOL or your flying car, and you are at the grocery store in 6 minutes. So, Angelo, you go first. What's your prediction about this?
So I don't think we're at a point yet where someone has at least publicly stated the, maybe I'm going to use the word business model again, but how this would all work. Like, yep, here, it's going to be, an eVTOL, a car coming to your house like an Uber, picking you up, taking you where? To a vertiport, a heliport.
Mm-hmm.
You take off, you land at a different heliport. Like, what does that look like?
Right.
Because
Sorry, we haven't even discussed the infrastructure required in building, like the takeoff, like the launch pads.
Infrastructure
and stuff, right?
is something we're also working on in parallel.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of dialogue and interesting conversations there. And what does the vertiport infrastructure look like? And you're charging, so you have to have charging facilities and the capacity to do that. And if you're out in a rural area, how do you get electricity out there? But we're getting there, and we can certainly fly now, and we're getting thousands of flight hours in. And so at least by 2030, you're going to see people being able to pay to fly. I mean, technically, EHang is certified in China, and those airspaces that follow the Chinese authority, and so you can pay to fly in one of their aircraft in China today. And that's kind of what's holding us up. Is you can't. They're under experimental flight certifications now, so they can fly. And they can.
Sorry, you said, can you
experimental flight certification? So anyone can develop and build an aircraft and fly it, as long as they get that experimental flight certification through the FAA, and they can fly over, restricted airspace. They can controlled airspace, and that's more or less how they're doing flight testing now, unless they get special exceptions from the FAA, like, oh yeah, we're going to land like Joby and I think Archer or Beta or in Manhattan, and but you can fly today. It's just a question of when they're going to allow people to pay to be a passenger, and I think by 2030, certainly there's going to be people flying around and paying to be in an electric aircraft. And
so that's where that's the Waymo scenario, if I may.
And
they'll
probably be using legacy infrastructure, is my understanding, like a heliport.
And how about Angela? How about the more Jetsons-esque world where this is truly mainstream
proliferate?
Exactly. Yeah. So what year? If you had a crystal ball, and we're not going to. 50 years from now, we're not going to come back and look at this podcast and give you a gotcha. But what's your best guesstimate of when this is truly Jetson style everywhere?
I would say by 2040, you'd potentially see that. It's surprising. That's 15 years away. But I'd say by 2030, you're going to have people paying to fly in an air taxi.
And Leo, how about you?
So, in my opinion, we really have to build our aircraft to use existing infrastructure rather than invent infrastructure to work for these aircraft. So, like, some of them can use existing airports. And if we really want to expand to cities, like, for example, our vehicle, we're designed to land on street and take off from street. And our main idea is to utilize existing infrastructure so we can actually scale up fast enough to be a mainstream. So what really want to do is we want to land on the street and take off from the street and find where these points that you can take off and land within your route to actually scale around cities. And then we also our vehicles is configured to tie into level 3 chargers, which is standard EV chargers. So if you drive an EV charger, so that way you can utilize existing infrastructure rather than use some of. I've met last week with a company. They have a portable charger that can go to your vehicle with a long cable and tie to it. And this is cool, but it's really can't scale. If you really want to scale, you have to use existing infrastructure, and so you have to do it like the Tesla way. Otherwise, it takes 2040, 2050. It's become a dream and it will never happen. In my opinion, I think the milestone Angelo gave within the next 5 years to see a Waymo style this is very feasible. Like I said earlier, next year there'll be I think it's Joby, it could be Archer. I can't recall. They're actually approved, theoretically to fly in San Francisco. So they'll be like the Waymo, the first Waymo of San Francisco next year. And what I would say, in the next 5 years, you'll start seeing some air traffic, where you start seeing vehicles going back and forth, and you see, oh, this is the evTOL. It's like more than you would see a helicopter today. And if you're in a big city, you'll see a lot of helicopters. It's a common thing to see. Within the 10 years milestone, it will start scaling up a lot faster. Our autonomy is basically going to be advanced every year. So we have about 6 months milestone, then 6 months, 6 months, 6 months, and then we'll be scaling. What we're trying to do, we're trying to also build a modular autonomy that can be installed on other evTOLs, so they can also be autonomous. So what we'll be doing, we'll be collecting data using their vehicle, and then integrating that data with our infrastructure on the ground, and then building that autonomy infrastructure. So that's, in my opinion, 10 years after that, you'll see a lot more traffic, and every year you'll see way more traffic, and start going exponential. The more you can prove that they work safely, the more you can prove that autonomy actually works, and all that. Regulation is, one of the main hinders of that. Like, you could do a lot of things in San Francisco very easily, but how long will it take to go to other cities? And I think the motivation for our government is looking at, Saudi Arabia. They bought 100 Joby vehicle, and they can fly them just because the king of Saudi Arabia can say, okay, we can fly today. Then they can fly today. And China is very active with EHang and Xpeng or Cheapang to actually make it a reality. And we have to keep up to be also the leaders in this technology, and that's the only way to make regulations more compatible with the technology evolution, and then actually go hand to hand with the regulators to make it a reality.
It's a great point. Last question for each of you, and we'll do this lightning round style here. So let's end on kind of a hopeful note and kind of optimistic note to remind everyone of why we're even here, why we care about this in the first place. Angelo, what excites you about a world of vertical flying vehicles, a world where these are readily accessible, and we've done it, we've cracked the code? Kind of what excites you, but what that future looks like. Angelo, you go first, and Leo, what are your thoughts too?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we like to say in the helicopter community is that helicopters save lives. And being able to transport, whether it be people that are injured or casualties, to a hospital more quickly, just to get them there and be able to implement the medical, what they need to save them. That's alone something to strive towards. And we have companies that we work with, United Therapeutics and Unether, who are working on organ transplants and trying to transport organs rapidly and not have to worry about traffic and driving in a truck to get an organ, a lung, to someone that needs it. And so there's that side to it. In addition to just being able to transport goods, services, people more quickly and maybe more cheaply, inexpensively, is something that we all strive to do as humans in civilization. And if these air taxis, air cars, evTOL can do that, then all the better. So that's something to look forward to. Awesome.
Leo, yourself?
Yeah, I think Angelo covered it very good. The only thing I would add is, one of the main reasons we started the company, traffic is one big factor in, why would you do a flying vehicle? But since it's electric, also emission is a big factor. And in our, vision of the company, we really wanted to reduce the emission that you see on the ground in a way that can scale up to actually be impactful, where you can go in a city and you breathe cleaner air. During COVID, this is where we really started this company. If you guys remember the lockdown, when the lockdown happened, we got reports I used to work for a utility in Southern California, Edison, back then. We got reports for emission. Within that few days of the lockdown, the city of Los Angeles sky cleared all the way. And if you know how LA looks, it's usually a city with a cloudy sky. You can't see anything. And it cleared up all the way within just few days of lockdown. What that teaches us is it's possible to actually reduce that emission that we're breathing every day, and it can be done. It just, everybody, obviously we're not going to tell everybody to stay at home and not drive, but we want to invent new technologies that has a cleaner, it's electric, it doesn't have emission released in the air in the city where you and your family will breathe it. And we want to do it at a scale where we can actually have an impact and reduce that carbon greenhouse gas effect and the gas emissions. So that's kind of the other main factor.
Awesome. Great note to end on. Thanks, guys. Best of luck to both of you. Leo, you have a roof deck here in Denver. You can use it as a launch pad. Happy to volunteer my services to help you with that. I am super excited. I am pulling for both you guys. Thanks again, and best of luck to you guys both.
Thank you so much for your time and for having us.
So there you have it. Thanks again to Angelo Collins, the Executive Director of the Vertical Flight Society, and Leo Kayali, CEO of Invo Station. I personally am fired up. Even if flying cars are not right around the corner, it's exciting and kind of invigorating to hear that it's quite likely they will be mainstream in our lifetime. Something to look forward to. But in the meantime, before you buy your first flying car, first subscribe to AI Curious. Please rate it 5 stars, leave a comment. We're on all the usual places, including YouTube. Would love to hear your thoughts and a comment on YouTube, and send it to a friend. Send it to someone who has that kind of 12-year-old sense of wonder. They might enjoy a conversation like this. Thanks again, and see you next time.